Today we're going to cover a different kind of new launch. It's not going to be a residential kind of new launch, but it is a commercial project that we are going to cover, and that is actually located in a very nice rest of central region area, city-fringe.
District 12,
right
in the heart of Balestier.
The name is actually called Shoppes Ascent 456. Open Grand PSF is trending around a range of 1,003.
When we convert it to a 3 plus flexi, it's actually about 5.15 in terms of length.
Step 2, 3 and 21, they are 5 bathers. They face internally towards the pool.
But before we cover that project, we're going to cover on this particular topic, as you can see from the screen itself, right? Is low quantum commercial properties a missing piece in your real estate portfolio? I think today, whenever a lot of people come and come for advice and come for consult in terms of portfolio management, sometimes they have and they are wondering, I've really maxed out my name in the residential space, and I think that's happening quite often today. And they're thinking like, what else can I buy, right?
Correct. I think that's something that's quite often in terms of the thoughts in the head. But I've already done whatever I can. I've decoupled. I've split my names up to buy residential. What's next? I mean, of course, there's stocks and shares.
Of course.
But then I think, we always talk about owning an asset in Singapore. That's something that we can, use it on a more of a legacy thing as well. And more importantly, if it's freehold, that's really an additional bonus.
Yeah, did we mention that this is a freehold property?
Yes, it is.
Right. And I think it's also very important because whenever we talk about commercial properties, people always have that perception that it's something that's expensive, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, you think about it as like big quantum, big unit kind of stuff. Interestingly, today, the topic that we're going to cover is actually low quantum, but not low to the point that it is really, really low, but it is something that is pretty low in terms of commercial.
Yeah. We're talking about like easy entry, something that you and I, we can easily afford. More importantly, like what Wayne was sharing, that you don't need like millions just to own an asset.
Right, which is like you don't need millions, right, or to own a commercial or to own a piece of Singapore's commercial growth. Also, one of the myths, right, if let's say we can see the screen, is that this retail isn't dead. Right? It is something is evolving, and actually when it's evolving, the key is what? The entry price, right?
Yeah, and of course location. And I think we talk about retail. Yes, it is true. If you go into the malls, actually quite often you see a lot of, turnover in terms of the brands and all that. I think firstly, we also need to understand that in the malls itself, obviously the rental is high. There's also GTO and all that. So I think for like new brands to come in and occupy a space there, they need to have deep pockets.
Of course.
Yeah. And so imagine that if you're like a new brand in Singapore, you're thinking of, having a shop front, but perhaps you don't need the mall space, but yet owning a shopfront, a retail unit that allows you to, still pay the rent so-called, but mortgage payment, but yet you own the asset. I think that is like key to many businesses.
Of course. In Singapore, when you talk about owning a property, and there's always this thing in their mind is whether would there be any ABSD, whether would there be any SSD in terms of, let's say, I want to sell the property. Actually, for commercial, there is no ABSD, there is no SSD, right? But yet, people are still hesitant, right, to add this into their portfolio. Right. So this is actually the very interesting part when it comes to commercial and of course industrial. And even if you have watched the recent webinar by Melvin, Melvin has actually covered the whole entire industrial and commercial kind of like investment in Singapore in one of his webinars. If you haven't watched it, do remember to go and watch from our webinar on demand page. We covered the commercial and industrial part. Of course, industrial, it has that ABSD, and I think it's more of the SSD, right, where you can't sell and they have this holding period of 3 years.
Yes,
but
correct.
for commercial, no. Today you buy, tomorrow if you found somebody that wants to take over or you want to sell it, you can actually sell it tomorrow.
Yeah, and I think we talk about why people still hesitate. It's really more of, you don't know what you don't know.
Of course.
Really. And I think if we can educate consumers out there that clearly you and I, we can both own a piece of this commercial asset, that's something that we can all learn together.
Right, so let's go. What is the market outlook in 2025? And for this particular segment, I will have Pat share with us, in terms of like what is actually happening in terms of the broad market for 2025. It's an interesting year.
Yes,
first and foremost, the whole entire mortgage is starting, or rather the interest rate is starting to moderate lower. Right?
That's right. I think firstly is, I think we are also seeing, like what I mentioned earlier, that we're seeing little small brands that are coming up. right? Obviously, to go into a large space, that's gonna push up, whatever cash that they have. So we are also seeing a high increase in demand in terms of, smaller commercial spaces. We also notice that a lot of developers, when they carve out spaces, they'll carve out space like 400 square feet, 500 square feet, but it is really to cater for just a frontage. It may not be like a massive flagship store, but it's more of having that presence in the particular location. So we're definitely seeing that, and that's why, some of the strata titled units are getting very, very popular. This is just commercial, right? Even if you look at industrial itself, the ground floor units are always taken up quickly.
I think it's the convenience, right? Because, for businesses, I always want to be on the ground floor. I want to be road facing. I want to have a good frontage.
Correct.
All these adds together for a very good kind of like, I would say visitings or even human work footfall.
Correct. And I think even for offices as well, we look at, I think the research, I think last year, second half of the year itself, there were already a lot of transactions for offices that were below the $2 million marks. So I think we are also seeing that people also look at quantum, like as long as it's below 2 million or, around the 1 mil plus range, it's something that's still palatable and it is sort of considered like an easy entry for businesses.
I think there's a similar trade towards residential as well, right? Because residential, when you talk about residential, it's also still a quantum stuff, but it also depends on where you are looking at, whether it's a quantum play or a PSF play. But I think behind it, in terms of servicing that property, of course, we want to look at the whole entire interest rate, right? So of course, for this, credit to mortgage-wise, right? We have this chart over here that actually shows the whole entire interest rate cycle, right?
And of course, the thing is, we are also seeing that it's tapered downwards already, right? At where we are at this juncture.
Right.
Even for commercial loans, that's already now currently, at this point of shoot, we're like in the month of June, right? So we're looking at maybe about 2.6% thereabouts. Actually, not too far off from.
I think, likely to be. Depending on your loan.
Correct. So
package.
Maybe 2.6 or maybe 2.8 or 3. It depends. It really depends on, the banks. But we've got clients who are coming back and saying, they have gotten 2.6, which is very, very reasonable at this point because residential itself is still around like maybe 2.4, 2.5. So we're seeing a little bit of an equivalent right there.
Right.
So that is actually great because with a lower interest rate, that will definitely help people to a bit more buying power in that sense,
Correct. And I think when we talk about property, we're always talking about leveraging, right? So you always want to leverage with a loan so that you can actually use that growth potential, right? Now, how about the next one is actually in terms of the alternative assets, right?
So it's exactly how we started, earlier on, which is how we are seeing people, after they have maxed out their names for residential, then it's the question of what's next, right? Obviously, maybe you're not familiar with the commercial scene at this point of time, but this is definitely something that is accessible to you, right? A few things that we noted earlier, no SSD, no ABSD.
No ABSD, right.
So, which also means that foreigners is easy for any one of them to still consider because residential is like almost out of reach. We're looking at 60% just for ABSD.
Right.
But in this case, there's none. So imagine buying a commercial space. If I'm a foreigner, I can buy today and then maybe in 1 year time and I think that, the price has gone up, I can really sell it. So that's the beauty of it.
Yep. So, of course, we have covered basically the market outlook, but we also want to, bring you to the attention to this screen. So I'm just going to bring you to this chart itself. So if you look at this particular chart, you can actually see that this is the whole entire District 12 versus the whole entire Singapore freehold commercial shops kind of like trending. So we can see that we are actually looking in the range of 2010 to 2025, but let's not look into, we don't have to really look all the way back to 2010, but what I want to draw your attention to is actually on this particular portion. As you can see over here, the blue color graph, it actually represents the whole entire Singapore pricing in terms of PSF for a freehold commercial shops. Whereas for the red color, this represents the D12 numbers. And there is actually a disparity, right? There's a disparity in terms of the D12, which is in a city-fringe area versus the whole entire Singapore pricing where we are still seeing them trending at around 3,000 odd PSF, whereas in D12, it is about 2,000 odd PSF. And we think that this is actually a hidden gem because you are very near the city-fringe area, and this particular project that we're going to talk about, which is Shoppes at Ascent 456, is actually very close to the whole entire new Novena rejuvenation area. So I think this is something that we want to draw your attention to as well. So now let's back to the whole entire studio, right? When we talk about investments, right?
What are some of the investors thinking? I think firstly is, we talk about commercial. I think some people will also think like, are investors still buying into like HDB shop houses? Do you think it's like overheated?
I think it is, right? I think it is because HDB shop house, first and foremost, they are not a freehold status, right? And it is, of course, in terms of like if you're buying a good area, there's a lot of human footfall, and I think businesses, especially you see a lot of companies, like those kind of like bakery shops.
Yes.
You have other brands like maybe the Watson or the convenience shops. They are all opening up businesses in these kind of HDB shop houses. So I'm not saying that they are not a good buy, but of course quantum will definitely be high. Today, all the HDB shop houses are very high quantum. So based on the data that we have over here, right, by Amicus, it actually tells us that there were 63 HDB shop houses that actually changed hand for $122 million as of September 2024, and that has already surpassed the whole entire year of 2023 number that was actually at $91 million. So you can see that actually there was a huge demand for HDB shop houses, either for the convenience or whether is it because of that flexi dual kind of like layout where you can have the residential component on the top for you to rent it out, and then at the bottom for you to do business and rental. So there's different kind of like flexible arrangement for HDB shop houses.
Yeah, but of course, keeping in mind that the per square feet is a lot higher.
A lot.
And also, like you talk about how these are ultimately HDB shop houses. So the balance lease, a lot of them are between like 40 over to 50 over years left. And obviously, HDB no longer builds this kind of shop houses already.
Nope. All right. Then what about industrial? What about industrial? Let's see industrial. So what do you think about industrial properties? Are investors going to industrial?
Yeah, I think it is still, a common asset that many investors look into. Firstly, I think quantum is very palatable. But I think keeping in mind also that, what used to be, some of the industrial buildings where it's 60 years, they no longer have that. So a lot of the 60 years building, they are left with about maybe 40 over years. And then the newer ones are between 20 or 30 years only in terms of leasehold. Yeah. So at the end of the day, what you own is not a freehold asset, right? Even though quantum is low, but sometimes with quantum low, because it's ultimately an industrial unit, the per square feet in terms, your rental will also be lower. Sometimes units like maybe upper floor units, probably looking at $1.80 PSF, and then the ground floor, it can be $2.50 to $3 PSF. So definitely, lower quantum in terms of entry, right? But it also means that your rental is also lower.
Pat, what is the average kind of like PSF for commercial shop houses?
If I look at maybe Oxley B sub area, right? That's your like Ubi area.
Where we are.
Yes, where we are. So I think the PSF ranging about 600 over all the way to maybe even 800 over PSF. And we are talking about not freehold, We're talking about just maybe 60 years leasehold development. And of course, there are some older ones which are maybe about 500 over. Like Vertex, I think 500 over PSF you can still find. Yeah. So, of course, PSF looks good, but it is ultimately still industrial and it's restrictive use because if it's B1, it means it's clean and light industry, right? It is restrictive. And also the use as well within the space, you have to adhere to the 40-60 ruling.
Right.
So there's definitely more restrictions when it comes to industrial. Yeah.
As compared to commercial, it's a bit different, right?
Yeah. You can't technically use it as a retail store because even for ground floor units, you do have to do a change of use into a showroom status unit.
Okay.
And that's why you see a lot of the IDs and furniture shop, they also set up their flagship store in industrial.
So which actually means that actually low quantum actually makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
Right? Because low quantum, it means that there's a lower outlay, that's easy to entry, that's easy for you to enter into this kind of like segment, right? And financing options are actually much, much more accessible.
That's right.
And when you talk about low quantum, then of course the yield will then make sense, right? Because when you talk about high quantum, then of course, if you can get a very, very high rental, then you get a better yield. But in terms of yield on average, what's the number that we're looking at?
Usually, what used to be what used to be like maybe like 6-7% easily is already different. It's different now, obviously.
6-7%, wow.
Yeah, because imagine like an industrial property, let's say, what used to be maybe 300,000, now you can only buy at maybe 900,000 or $1 million. So, and the rental is not like as if it doubled. It doesn't. It doesn't work that way. With the quantum increase and also, the rental being still, it's increasing but not steep. that will definitely bring out that rental yield.
Of course.
So I think anything above maybe 3.5% is
it
actually
considered
still
good?
great to go in.
Right. So I think this is also one of the key aspects of our Ascent, shops at Ascent 456.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, we just want to quickly run through in terms of what are the types of, let's say you are interested to go into a low quantum kind of like commercial assets, what are the available ones in the market, right?
Yeah.
So of course you have B1 light industrial.
Which is what we said
Earlier on, right? Those low quantum, or even those kind of like retail shops in mixed use developments. Right? Mixed use developments, there's a couple of them, right? I mean, of course, you can mix use from residential and commercial, or you can go for those really pure commercial. So there are various types of different types.
Yeah, and I think those are attractive because ultimately you do get shop front, right? In a mixed development, at the end of the day, where the location is, the units on the ground floor especially, you do get high footfall, which is quite similar to some of those shop house units. So even though you're not buying a high quantum shop house units, shop house unit, you're actually buying one that gives you that same footfall, but yet of a lower PSF and entry quantum.
We have also a couple of misconceptions.
Oh yeah,
right?
we need to clear the fog here.
Okay.
Right?
So what is that? What's that?
I think a lot of people think that, investing in commercial is very scary. But, some think that, only big players can invest, and I mean, it is not quite true because ultimately it also depends on the quantum that we talked about earlier, right? The entry quantum. And also I think in today's market, we are seeing a lot more strata titled units, which are definitely palatable in terms of entry price. So like we have been emphasizing just now, you and I, we can own a piece of such an asset.
What is the difference between a strata unit and a non-strata unit? Maybe you can explain to the audience.
So strata title units would be, like how in a building, individually units, it can be owned by different owners. Yeah, but if it's a non-strata means me alone, I will own the entire building.
And then I rent it out?
I rent it out. Yeah, correct. So I think for the good thing is that, strata title will allow all kinds of investor or even end user in terms of business use to come in and purchase. They can decide whether they want to rent it out or they can use for their own business use.
Right. So I mean, of course, strata title, usually if you go to those kind of like maybe, let's say neighborhood kind of like mixed developments, maybe you will see some of them which is like strata titled or individually owned.
Correct.
Right. So you can have probably, anybody, they'll just buy the place, they'll just rent it out to different type of businesses for them to operate there.
Of course. I think the thing to take note is also like, strata title developments or units, right? The thing is, of course, you cannot control who comes in. That's the only thing. So in terms of the control of the whole building feel, it may not, you may not be able to control fully because individually owned is definitely different.
Which is why I think location is very important, right? Because the location will also determine the type of businesses that will come into the whole entire development, right? So which is why it comes to our next point of location. But in terms of location, we want to focus a lot into our current place as well. But in terms of location wise, where are the very common kind of like locations do you think that you can find?
In terms of like
commercial?
Yeah, there are plenty actually everywhere. So even in town itself, there are. Even in the CBD area, you can find it. But obviously, PSF is going to be sky high.
The CCR, right?
Yes. You also can see, in the neighborhoods, right? Really outskirts area, your Kovan area, Bishan area, Thompson shop houses. Those are also shopfront units actually. And even in the east side, in the East Coast area, there are also plenty of this kind of mixed-use development where you have shop fronts.
But shop houses, I think, is a little more expensive.
For sure. A lot more expensive.
Especially those in the Chinatown area where, if once you're being labelled as a conservation kind of like status, then that will be like a price asset for people who wants to collect them and buy them, right?
Correct. But I think more importantly is, you may not need to own an asset in the city. But having one that's in the city fringe, that would be great because convenience, you just need to own a location there, in terms of traveling to your clientele base, it's actually nearby.
Which is where we are going to bring to you today. District 12, right? So District 12 is actually, in this area, it's called the Balestier area. And if you're not familiar with this place, Balestier area is actually in between Toa Payoh, which is a neighborhood.
It's a mature estate.
And Novena, which is like a commercial estate, plus also all the high-end developments, residential developments that is in the area. So Balestier is actually, if you are doing a renovation and you're buying lights,
Balestier is where you'll go.
Balestier is basically where you'll go to, right? So you can find a lot of nice food and options there as well. But one thing great about Balestier area is, of course, it has a good mix, right, of what we feel in terms of like a heritage kind of feel, plus the fact that it's very near to the city fringe area. I think we're going to bring up the map so that we can actually talk more about this place.
Sure. I think we talk about location-wise. So where we are is actually over this part here. This is where Shoppes Ascent 456 is located. Well, obviously, you want to familiarize a little bit in terms of, this location, right? What's popular here, obviously, is the Balestier Food Centre. We've got a big open space car park right behind. Obviously, that's where a lot of us will also park if we want to, eat in this area. Of course, what's nearby would be the Shaw Plaza, which recently went through a whole new rejuvenation. They have brought in new tenant mix. So you see, for a mall to decide to have new rejuvenation, it's also because that, residential over there has picked up. And we're seeing a lot more residents, going past this area, visiting the shops. And that's why this definitely makes sense for Shaw Plaza. And of course, going down this road, this will lead you towards the entire Jalan Besar area. Extremely convenient, right? PIE and CTE is literally sandwiched between us. So definitely easy in terms of commute. Right? What's before us will be Zhongshan Mall and then followed by all the other shop houses that I'm sure you guys are familiar with. We talk about rejuvenation, right? Actually over on this side, at this corner where Mount Pleasant is, that's where we have got a whole new injection of 5,000 over HDB units. They will be plunked into that space, which also means that in future, this will be the residents who are going to travel towards the Balestier area for food options, to find, retailers and all that. So this will definitely be a very busy area if we look at the opportunities to come for Balestier. And I think just now Wayne was sharing also that we are sandwiched between Novena and Toa Payoh as well. So this area right across is where Toa Payoh is. The MRT station is located there. It's walkable. And of course, over on this side, we've got Novena MRT station. I mean, maybe you might think that it's not walkable, but actually if you were cut through all these lanes, it's actually not that far away. I think the other thing to take note is also we talk about injecting in, new profiles into the environment, right? We've got 2 BTO. We love BTO, right? Having BTOs there would also mean that you've got new families coming in, which also means that this entire stretch, if you were to set up shop here, you're gonna get very, very good visiting from all these neighbors.
Yeah, so I think that is actually a great scene. I mean, if you look at the whole entire map itself, we are in this particular area where there's so much rejuvenation.
Yes.
The whole entire Novena area is right over here, your health hub. And this is where the government is putting a lot of attention to. You have a lot of good residential developments. In fact, these residential developments on this part of actually Balestier, it's big. They are big developments. They're not those kind of like small boutique developments.
And they are doing very well.
Correct. So once all this will have what we see, it's like an overflowing kind of like effect towards the whole entire businesses and commercial spaces in the Balestier space. Right. So now let's go back into the slide. I'm going to share with you more about this Shoppes at Ascent 456. So what is this project about? Let's do a quick overview. This is actually a freehold development, right? Freehold development, and this is actually a mixed-use development. So they have a mixture of residential and a commercial. In fact, for commercials, there's about 17 shops right here.
Correct. And I think out of 17, we only have 7 units available, which also means that, it has gotten really, really popular through this period.
Yep.
And we're only left with 7 units, 5 which are shopfront retail units. 2 will be F&B. We'll show you the
details later on, but if you are not familiar with this building and if you have driven past Balestier, you may have seen it, right? This is actually how it looks like. There's a honeycomb kind of like design at the facade area and it has a very good frontage. And if you have seen the map earlier on, we are located right beside the petrol kiosk, which is, I think is
SPC.
Yeah, SPC petrol kiosk. As you can see from the screen right now, right over there. So that's actually the location. We have a couple of photos to show how the building looks like. So this is a mixed-use development. It has level 1, you have level 2 for the commercial space, and also the basement, which is a very unique feature because that basement actually comes together with the level 1 unit.
That's right.
We're going to share more in details later on as well. Level 2, and then on the top, that will actually be the residential portion. Right? So when we talk about that level 1 unit, what's so interesting about this, right, is based on the brochure from a developer, it mentioned about maximizing your investment, right? How does that sound like?
Yeah, I think this is great. I think firstly, we need to talk about the layout. I think it's very, very interesting how they have, maximized, the entire space, even though the shopfront may seem small when you walk past, but what you have down below is going to be another space where you can definitely host, you can have your dining space there. So it feels like a private dining zone.
Yeah, in fact, it's high ceiling, right? If I'm not wrong, I saw some of the photos as well.
About 3.5 meters.
Yeah. So, only the ground floor unit gets access to the basement units as well, and there is actually dual entry point. So you can either go in from the ground level, you can take a steps down from the outside, go down to the basement as well. So this is actually how it looks like in terms of the site plan. So those units that's being marked as a yellow
star.
color star, right? Those are the units that's available. Green color are retail shops. The beige color unit actually is the F&B outlet.
Yeah.
Right.
So what this means is also that it is grease trap ready and exhaust ready. So for any F&B businesses out there, you can definitely own this asset right here. You can run your F&B straight into the unit. You don't have to reinstate into, bad condition and install in your exhaust or grease trap.
Yeah. So as you can see on this screen as well, so it shows the first floor and the basement unit. Let's say the F&B unit itself, which is the beige one, on the first floor, you will notice that the size is a little smaller, but once you go down into the basement, it is actually of a much regular size as well.
Yes, actually it's very comfortable. Our home tour, if you can also refer to that, we will be able to, show you exactly what the space feels like in the basement. Actually, it feels really comfortable. And like I said, it really feels like, if you were to set up like a bar area and, the basement becomes like your private dining zone, actually it's beautiful.
Yeah. So now let's go to the second floor unit. And the second floor unit actually has 4 units available. And these are all demarcated by the star on the screen. But what is the difference in colors is that the one in blue color is actually tenanted right now.
Yeah, which also means that if you are an investor, these units will make sense because it is already ready with a tenancy. The moment when you purchase, it's purchased with the full tenancy. And the rental yield, we're looking at above 3.5%, which is exactly what we're talking about, right?
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So those are the options that's available, and you can basically reach out to us. We can always arrange a viewing at the physical place itself. So what actually makes this whole entire project, Shoppes at Ascent 456, stands out is actually really the low entry price. Right? We're talking about starting from $1.1 million.
Correct. Yeah, I think having a low entry quantum, that really allows you to, have a lesser outlay. And yet at the same time, having a retail shop, I think that is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And I think over here, because of the size that we have, I think one of the smaller units that is available, I think that is at about 404 square feet. So I think that is still okay, a good size to go into. Like I mentioned, you may not have that full flagship store over there, but maybe more like a shopfront presence along the main Balestier Road. And owning it at about 1.1 million starting from, I think that's really a good way.
I will just quickly switch over to the slide where we have a summary of the kind of shops size range, quantum range, as well as also the PSF range.
Correct.
Right? So the level 1 shops, the smallest unit actually stands at 732 square feet and the biggest unit stands at 807 square feet. So it's a range. Quantum wise, it's about $2.9 to $3 million. So the ground floor unit, because of this bigger size, why? Because of the duplex.
Yes,
right,
of
kind
course.
of like layout configuration, you get a higher quantum, and of course the PSF will be slightly higher. But in fact, when you look at this PSF, I think it
still makes sense because
for freehold.
Yes, and also the other thing is the 4,000 PSF, that's looking at the F&B outlet, which usually it commands for a higher quantum anyway.
Yeah, correct. And then for level 2, of course, being level 2, you only have one single floor plate, and that will basically means that you are looking at the size of 400 to about 900 odd square feet. Quantum wise will be $1.1 million starting from all the way up to 2.28 million.
And PSF, it makes sense.
Yeah, right.
Correct.
Because you're back towards having a freehold status kind of like property in your portfolio.
That's right.
Right. So now let's go back to where we talk about, which is what makes it stands out. It's actually also because of that location of being in a city-fringe D12 near towards the whole entire Novena medical hub. Right?
Yeah, that's where also the whole rejuvenation is coming on. I mean, Tan Tock Seng itself, they're expanding. We are expecting more businesses that will come into there, which also means that it will be a natural flow towards Balestier, because how many F&B outlets or how many retail shops can be found in Novena? Sometimes they'll have to flow over.
And in fact, if you're a business owner of any of the businesses that is actually located right along Balestier Road, and you want to add another shop front to your portfolio, or to add another shop front to your retail space, I think this is also something that you can consider as well, because we do see some businesses that actually have multiple shop fronts along the same street as well. So it is a way for them to accommodate the multiple portfolios or the products that they have.
Correct.
Yep.
And I saw, keeping in mind that Balestier itself, the residential projects there, they are also doing relatively well with the new BTO plots that are coming up. Again, at the end of the day, this is where you will be having more residents that will come through the shop space.
Yeah, and of course, when we buy a property, of course, in today's day and age, we are either looking at rental investment, or rental yield, or we are looking at in terms of capital appreciation. What we are, confident, or what we are say that we think that what will happen in future is actually because it is a freehold. So there is something for you to hedge on, right? And you don't really have to worry about lease decay. You don't really have to worry about whether the building will be, the lease will be like going downwards. So there will be future growth potential.
For sure.
Especially when you think about the whole entire rejuvenation all around the whole entire Balestier area, your Toa Payoh, your Mount Pleasant, all the way down to the Novena area.
Correct. And I think also later we'll compare a little bit on the price point on the neighboring, developments, which will definitely help you make sense why we are saying the capital appreciation potential.
Yeah, we usually will try to foresee like who will actually be the kind of like buyers, or whether do you fit this kind of like profiles that we think may want to add this kind of like portfolio, or what this kind of like asset into the portfolio. So it will likely be people like, let's say for example, if you're SME owners, which I mentioned earlier on, you are already running a business along Balestier, and you want to have an additional shop front, a good one, a freehold status, right, in a good location, right close to Zhongshan Mall, which is a lot of rejuvenation in the area as well.
Yeah.
This is also one of our ideal kind of like buyer profile.
Correct. Now, of course, the next thing will be retirees, because again, I think some of them, whether have they upgraded to a big property or downgraded into a smaller property, sometimes they may have the additional cash asset that is still with them. And many of them, they may not go into the stocks and shares because it might be a little bit high risk. So then this could be an option, because really we're talking about a legacy thing. They can pass it on to the next generation as well.
Right. And also first-time commercial buyer that you want to really step into the whole entire commercial space. And because you are a first-time buyer, you may not want to go into something that's of a very, very high quantum. So you may want to look for something that's around $1 million to $1.5 million kind of range. So we do have the perfect unit for you as well, right over here in Shoppes Ascent.
And I think the other thing is also having this commercial retail unit. We just need to understand this is retail status, which also means that people can use it for showroom. They can use it for, like a dessert takeaway store, especially for like the F&B outlet. They can use it as a restaurant. So there are really lesser restriction in terms of use. If you are an aesthetic company, you can also rent the space there. So you definitely have a good tenant pool in terms of the businesses looking at spaces.
Yeah. So now let's look at some of the comparative market analysis in terms of the market positioning of Shoppes Ascent at 456 versus some of the surrounding areas as well, right? So you can see over here, definitely there's a couple of projects that's around the area like Balestier Plaza, Balestier Point.
Yes. Yeah. I think we just look at, so we want to compare District 11, 12 and 13 because that's just around us, right? So District 11, obviously we're comparing the Novena Regency is also mixed development, right? And then Royal Square, it is more of like a medical center mixed with retail and mixed with, offices. So I think definitely the per square feet, it will be higher for sure. But if we were to compare apple to apple, right? Mixed development, if we compare to Novena Regency, which is sort of freehold development, they are looking at $7,000 PSF. So they are definitely pricing themselves very close to the Royal Square.
But this is more like the CCR area.
Of course. But that's not far from us.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to commercial devices, when it comes to commercial properties, we are also looking at different region, kind of like disparity, right? So you have a chance to own something that's close towards the CCR area at literally half the kind of like PSF pricing.
Exactly. And I think within District 12 itself, there are many to compare. I think Balestier is definitely known for mixed development.
It is.
But we also want to make sure that you're not hidden inside the inner lanes, but yet you're along the main Balestier road.
Yes. So this is very important because businesses, you want that kind of like visibility, right?
Correct. And I think if we look at some of these developments right here, One Dusan Residences, Balestier Plaza, Balestier Point, which is an older development as well, Urban Heritage, which is sort of like in an inner lane. If you look at the PSF, they are all above 3,000 already. Yeah. So which then makes our pricing kind of make sense, because for us to enter into, for you to enter into Balestier itself, some of our units is starting from 2,400 PSF.
Refresh again the PSF on the screen. You can see The level 2 unit is starting from $2,433 per square foot as compared to the market that's around the area as well.
Yeah. And if we go along that District 12, which is also Toa Payoh, right? We've got the shop house.
Is that a shop house?
Yes, that's a HDB shop house. And you look at the price point, is 9,000 over PSF. So owning a property like that, I mean, yes, it does look good in terms of your portfolio. I own a HDB shop house with high footfall. I can rent to Watsons, big brands.
Yeah.
But then, you are looking at a small size of 420 square feet and your commitment is 3 over million.
Plus, it's not freehold.
It's not freehold. Most likely it's 40 over years left.
Yeah, correct. Then, of course, you have to go a little bit further towards the Potong Pasir area. Of course, you have your venue, shops at the venue. 99 years is a newer project. We did cover that in one of our show, one of our video tour as well. We are selling, interestingly, in the shops, they also do have that car park space that we are selling.
Yeah, and of course, last but not least, MacPherson Mall, of course, that's a mall status and PSF is above 4,000.
Right. So to conclude, right, the key takeaway for this is that this is actually a very rare chance for you to enter into a city fringe D12 area and also to own a freehold commercial portfolio.
Yes.
Right, commercial asset in your portfolio. And being low quantum, it makes you easy to entry, easy to enter.
Correct. And of course, we always talk about easy to entry is important, but being able to exit is also important. And I think in Balestier area, we do have a very strong exit, potential. I mean, we look at, again, the rejuvenation in the area. We look at some of the residential that are coming up. This will definitely bring about a lot of eyeballs. And exiting, if you have a freehold property, you don't have to worry about that.
Yep. So of course, when you look at this whole entire project itself, the micro and then the macro factors, like in the whole entire year itself of 2025, what's happening in the global market in terms of the economy, in terms of the interest rate, this is something that actually allows you to leverage on this opportunity to then expand your portfolio probably into this commercial space. Right? And we feel, right, the whole entire project of Shoppes Ascent 4, 5, 6, right? With all this, how many shops is about 7? Yeah, 7 shops.
Available.
Shops balance available. And these are something that you may want to consider. And if you are interested to find out more, do not hesitate to actually reach out to our consultants and we will be more than happy to, to bring you down to the place itself for you to view the place, or if you want to have a discussion in terms of how to add this into your portfolio, we are also happy to sit down and have a discussion with you as well.
That's right.
All right, so with that, we have come to the end of this very special kind of like new launch review. It's not residential, but a commercial new launch. This is your chance to get into D12 city fringe area for a freehold commercial that's low quantum to enter. And it is located right beside the main Balestier Road. You have good visibility, good shop front kind of like footages are frontaged. And I think this is something that is very exciting and we can't wait to share with you more. So my name is Wayne.
And I'm Patricia.
See you in the next episode of the New Launch Studio Review. Bye!